The afternoon sun streamed through the giant glass windows of Riverside Mall, casting warm patches of light across the polished floors. Among the weekend crowd, a teenage girl moved between stores, shopping bags swinging gently at her side. Her dark curls were pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore her favorite navy blue sweater, a gift from her dad on her 16th birthday. She wasn't just any teenager, though. Being the daughter of a high-ranking FBI agent had taught her valuable life lessons that most kids her age never had to think about. Always carry ID. Stay aware of your surroundings. Keep your receipts. Know your rights. These weren't just random rules. They were essential life skills her father had carefully instilled in her since childhood. The familiar scent of cinnamon rolls wafted from the food court as she walked past, reminding her that she hadn't eaten lunch yet. But first, she wanted to check out the new boutique everyone at school had been talking about. The store's bright lights and trendy displays drew her in, and she spent time carefully selecting a few items, a sweater for the upcoming winter and a scarf that perfectly matched her school backpack. At the counter, she smiled at the elderly cashier who commented on her choice of colors. She paid with the debit card her parents had given her for emergencies and shopping, carefully tucking the receipt into her wallet. Another habit her father had drilled into her: always keep proof of purchase. His voice echoed in her head as she folded the paper carefully. The mall was getting busier now, filled with the usual weekend crowd. Groups of friends huddled around phone screens, families juggled shopping bags and strollers, and elderly couples walked hand in hand, taking their usual weekend stroll through the climate-controlled corridors. It was the kind of normal Saturday afternoon she'd experienced countless times before. As she headed toward the food court, planning to finally grab that cinnamon roll, she noticed something felt off. Maybe it was those FBI instincts she'd inherited from her dad, or maybe it was just teenage paranoia, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Someone was watching her. She could feel it. Trying to stay calm, she remembered her father's words. If something doesn't feel right, stay in public spaces. Keep your phone accessible. Remember your training. She pulled out her phone, pretending to check messages while using the screen's reflection to glance behind her. That's when she saw him, a police officer, following at a distance, watching her every move. Her heart started beating faster, but she kept her pace steady. There was no reason to run. She hadn't done anything wrong. The receipt was in her wallet, the purchases were legitimate, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Still, something in the officer's gaze made her uncomfortable. It wasn't the usual casual scanning of the crowd. His eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that seemed unnecessary for a regular Saturday afternoon. Little did she know, this ordinary shopping trip was about to turn into something that would not only change her life, but would spark a conversation that needed to happen in their community. As she approached the food court, clutching her shopping bags a little tighter, she had no idea that the next few moments would test everything her father had taught her about staying calm under pressure. The bustling mall atmosphere suddenly felt different, less like the familiar weekend hangout spot and more like a stage where something significant was about to unfold. The food court ahead buzzed with activity, the chatter of families and friends, creating a backdrop of normalcy that was about to be shattered. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked forward, unaware that in just a few minutes, everything would change. The police officer stood near the pretzel stand, his eyes never leaving the teenage girl. 8 years on the force had left him with what he called instincts, though others might have called it something else entirely. His jaw clenched as he watched her exit the high-end boutique, his mind already made up about what he'd seen, or thought he'd seen. He'd started his shift that morning like any other, with a cup of black coffee and a quick briefing from dispatch. Mall duty wasn't his favorite assignment, but he'd requested it repeatedly over the past few months. Something about the mix of people, the constant flow of shoppers from different backgrounds, made him feel like he was maintaining order in his own way. The security cameras hummed quietly overhead, their lenses capturing every moment, though he paid them little attention. His focus remained fixed on the young shopper, her shopping bags swinging innocently at her side. To anyone else, she looked like just another teenager enjoying a weekend at the mall. But he convinced himself otherwise, despite the complete lack of evidence. His boots squeaked against the polished floor as he moved, maintaining what he thought was a discreet distance. Years of complaints about his aggressive approach to policing had done little to change his methods. If anything, they'd only make him more determined to prove his suspicions right, even when they were completely wrong. The food court buzzed with typical weekend activity: families sharing pizza slices, teenagers huddled over bubble tea, elderly couples splitting sandwiches. The officer moved between the tables, his hand resting on his belt, his presence causing subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Parents pulled their children closer, conversations quieted, and smiles faded as he passed. A young mother pushing a stroller quickly changed direction when she saw him approaching. An elderly man reading his newspaper suddenly became very interested in his coffee cup. These reactions weren't new. They'd been happening more frequently over the past few years, but he chose to interpret them as respect rather than what they really were: fear. The smell of fresh-baked cookies and sizzling fast food filled the air, but he barely noticed. His attention remained locked on the teenager, who was now standing in line at the cinnamon roll stand. He watched as she reached for her wallet, his suspicion growing despite the obvious signs that she was making a normal purchase. Nearby shoppers began to notice his focused surveillance. A group of college students whispered among themselves, one discreetly pulling out a phone. An off-duty nurse on her lunch break set down her fork, her years of emergency room experience telling her something was about to happen. The normal weekend mall atmosphere began to shift, tension building like static before a storm. The officer's radio crackled with routine updates about lost children and parking lot fender benders, but he wasn't listening. In his mind, he was about to make an important arrest, even though security cameras were recording everything, including the legitimate purchase he'd completely ignored just minutes earlier. His breathing quickened as he moved closer, weaving between tables with purpose now. The food court's bright lights gleamed off his badge, and his shadow fell long across the floor. Years of unchecked biases and reinforced prejudices were about to collide with innocent Saturday shopping, and dozens of witnesses were about to see exactly how wrong things could go. The teenager was now sitting at a table, her shopping bags placed neatly beside her chair, completely unaware of the approaching confrontation. She took out her phone, perhaps to text a friend or check social media, normal teenage activities that would soon be interrupted. The officer's fingers drummed against his belt as he closed the distance, his decision already made despite having no probable cause, no evidence, and no justification for what he was about to do. The cinnamon roll sat untouched on the food court table as the officer approached, his shadow falling across the teenage girl's phone screen. Her heart skipped a beat, but her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Stay calm. You have rights. Remember your training." She looked up, meeting the officer's stern gaze with as much composure as she could muster. "Stand up," the officer commanded, his voice cutting through the ambient mall noise like a knife. Several nearby diners stopped mid-bite, their attention drawn to the unfolding scene. The girl slowly rose from her chair, her movements deliberate and non-threatening, just as her father had taught her. "I need to check your bags," the officer stated, not asked. His hand rested on his belt as he spoke, an unnecessary show of authority that didn't go unnoticed by the growing crowd of onlookers. The girl's voice remained steady as she responded, "Sir, I have my receipts right here." She reached for her wallet, but the officer's sharp "don't move" froze her in place. The food court had fallen into an uneasy silence. A barista at the coffee kiosk pulled out her phone, pressing record. An elderly couple at the next table exchanged worried glances. A group of teenagers huddled together, their previously animated conversation about weekend plans forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. "Sir," the girl tried again, her voice clear despite her racing heart, "I'd like to call my parent. I'm a minor." She maintained eye contact, remembering her father's lessons about asserting rights calmly and clearly. The officer's response was to pull out his handcuffs, the metal catching the fluorescent light overhead. "Turn around," he ordered. The girl's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, I do not consent to any searches. I have done nothing wrong, and I'd like to call my parent." The words came out exactly as practiced, countless times at her kitchen table, though she'd never expected to actually need them. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists anyway, cold metal against warm skin. The sound seemed to echo through the now silent food court. A mother quickly covered her young son's eyes, hurrying him away from the scene. An off-duty nurse stood up from her lunch, phone already in hand, quietly noting badge numbers and details. "You're being detained for suspected shoplifting," the officer announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. The girl's voice shook slightly as she responded, "I have receipts for everything I bought. They're in my wallet. I demand to call my parent." The word demand was carefully chosen, another lesson from her father about being firm without being confrontational. The shopping bags sat untouched beside the table, their contents legally purchased just minutes ago. Security cameras whirred overhead, recording every moment of the baseless detention. A mall security guard hovered nearby, clearly uncertain about whether to intervene in what was quickly becoming a situation that would have serious consequences. Witnesses continued to record the scene on their phones, their expressions a mix of concern and outrage. A young law student scribbled notes on a napkin, documenting times and details. The girl stood perfectly still, feeling the eyes of dozens of strangers on her, knowing that how she handled the next few moments was crucial. "My father is a federal agent," she stated calmly, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "I'm going to reach for my phone with my cuffed hands and call him now. I'm telling you this so you don't see it as a threatening movement." Each word was deliberate, each action slow and announced, using her father's teachings about how to handle confrontations with law enforcement. The officer's face tightened, but he didn't stop her as she awkwardly maneuvered her phone from her pocket. The crowd watched in tense silence as she managed to dial, her fingers shaking but determined. In the background, the mall's cheerful music played on, a jarringly inappropriate soundtrack to the serious civil rights violation taking place beneath the food court's bright lights. The FBI field office hummed with the quiet energy of a Saturday afternoon. The senior agent sat at his desk, reviewing case files while occasionally glancing at the family photo on his desk. 20 years of federal service had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared him for the call that was about to come through. His phone buzzed against the wooden desk, his daughter's ringtone breaking the office's quiet atmosphere. A smile crossed his face as he reached for it. Their usual weekend calls involved questions about dinner plans or requests for extended curfews. This call would be different. "Dad." His daughter's voice was steady but tight with tension. "I need you to listen carefully." The agent's smile vanished instantly. Years of training kicked in as he grabbed a notepad, his hand moving automatically to write down details. "I'm at the mall food court. I'm being detained. The officer has no probable cause. I showed receipts. Unhandcuffed." The pen paused mid-word. His daughter continued, each word careful and clear, just as he taught her. "Badge number 4876. Officer refused to acknowledge receipts. Multiple witnesses recording. I'm using my rights exactly as we practiced." Pride mixed with anger in his chest, pride at his daughter's composure, anger at the situation she never should have faced. Without missing a beat, he pressed the intercom button on his desk phone. "This is Agent in Charge. I need a response team for a civil rights violation in progress at Riverside Mall." His voice remained professional, controlled, masking the fury building inside him. Years of training civilians about their rights, and now his own daughter was living through exactly what he'd warned about. His colleagues sprang into action. One agent was already pulling up the mall's security office number. Another was contacting the local police department's internal affairs division. A third was grabbing car keys, ready to move. The quiet Saturday afternoon had transformed into a coordinated federal response in mere seconds. "Stay on the line," he told his daughter, already moving toward the elevator. "Keep your phone on speaker. Continue stating your rights clearly. We're 3 minutes out." The elevator doors closed behind him and his team, their reflections showing determined faces and purposeful movements. This wasn't just about his daughter anymore. It was about every parent's child who might face the same situation. In the government-issued SUV, sirens silent, no need to escalate the situation further, the agent made rapid-fire calls. Mall security was already pulling footage. Internal Affairs was sending a representative. The police department's shift supervisor was being notified. Each call was precise, professional, focused on facts and procedures rather than emotional responses. His daughter's voice continued through the car's speaker system, providing updates. "Officer is becoming agitated by witness recordings. Mall security is standing by but not intervening. I'm maintaining my calm stance and continuing to assert my rights." Her voice carried the same professional tone he used during operations, and despite the circumstances, he felt a surge of pride. The mall came into view, its large parking lot dotted with weekend shoppers unaware of the situation unfolding inside. The agent adjusted his tie, checked his credentials, and took one deep breath. He had trained for hundreds of scenarios, handled countless high-pressure situations, but this one was different. This was personal, yet he needed to remain professional. "We're entering the mall now," he told his daughter, his voice steady. "Maintain your current position. Continue exactly as you are. Remember what we practiced." The automatic doors slid open, cool air conditioning hitting their faces as the team of federal agents moved with purposeful strides toward the food court. They weren't running. Running would escalate the situation. Instead, they moved with the calm, confident pace of federal agents who knew exactly what they were doing and had the full weight of the law behind them. The food court's normal weekend buzz had transformed into tense silence as the FBI agent and his team approached. Their footsteps echoed across the polished floor, drawing every eye in the vicinity. The agent walked with measured steps, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, flanked by his colleagues, mall security, and the internal affairs representative. Witnesses parted like a curtain, phones still recording, as the federal team made their way to where the officer stood with the handcuffed teenager. The officer's posture stiffened as he recognized the approaching federal badges, his hand instinctively moving away from his belt. The teenager remained perfectly still, just as she'd been trained. "Federal agent," the father announced, his voice carrying across the food court without shouting. He held up his credentials, letting them catch the light. "I'm here to address a civil rights violation in progress." The words were precise, professional, not those of an angry father, but of a federal officer upholding the law. The mall's head of security stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Sir, we have the security footage ready for review." On the screen, clear video showed the teenager making her purchases, receiving receipts, and walking normally through the mall. The internal affairs representative leaned in, taking careful notes as the footage played. "Officer," the FBI agent continued, his tone remaining measured, "you're currently detaining a minor without probable cause. The security footage confirms all purchases were legitimate. You've been recorded refusing to review receipts and escalating a non-situation. Each word was carefully chosen, each fact presented with the precision of someone who knew exactly how this would play out." The crowd of onlookers had grown, their phones capturing what was becoming a masterclass in professional law enforcement. A law student in the crowd whispered to his friend, "This is exactly how it's supposed to be handled." Nearby, a retired police officer nodded in approval at the methodical approach. The teenager's handcuffs clicked open under the supervising officer's direction. She rubbed her wrists but remained composed, reaching slowly for her wallet. "The receipts," she said quietly, holding them out. The internal affairs representative accepted them, comparing timestamps with the security footage playing on the tablet. Mall security had formed a subtle barrier, keeping curious onlookers at a respectful distance while ensuring everything remained visible to witnesses. The officer who had made the wrongful arrest stood rigid, his face a mix of emotions as he realized the full weight of his actions was being documented from multiple angles. "Your supervisor has been notified," the FBI agent informed the officer, his voice carrying just enough for the closest witnesses to hear. "You'll be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Please surrender your badge and firearm to the shift supervisor who's arriving now." The words weren't delivered with anger or triumph, just professional certainty. The shift supervisor, a veteran officer with graying hair, appeared through the crowd, her face grim but composed. She'd seen this coming, had warned about this officer's behavior before, and now she was witnessing the consequences unfold in the most public way possible. The teenager gathered her shopping bags, her movements calm and deliberate. Her father, the FBI agent, maintained his professional demeanor, but his eyes softened briefly as they met hers. This wasn't just about one wrongful detention anymore. It was becoming a moment that would change department policies and training procedures. "We'll need statements from all witnesses," the internal affairs representative announced to the crowd, her voice clear and professional. Phones with recordings were noted, contact information collected. What had started as a wrongful detention was transforming into a teaching moment for law enforcement everywhere. A demonstration of how proper procedure, professionalism, and accountability should work in real time. The mall's security office had transformed into an impromptu command center. Computer screens displayed footage from multiple angles, showing the entire incident in crystal clear detail. The teenage girl's legitimate purchases, the officer's unwarranted pursuit, the detention. Everything captured in high definition, leaving no room for doubt or misinterpretation. The police shift supervisor sat heavily in her chair, reviewing the footage for the third time. 23 years on the force hadn't prepared her for this particular Saturday afternoon. She watched as her officer ignored clear evidence, violated procedures, and created a situation that could have ended much worse if not for the teenager's remarkable composure. "This goes beyond one incident," the internal affairs representative said, spreading out a stack of previous complaints on the conference table. Patterns emerged from the paperwork: similar situations, similar profiling, similar disregard for procedure. The officer's personnel file told a story that should have been addressed long ago. Outside the security office, the mall had returned to its normal weekend rhythm, but whispers about what happened spread from store to store. Shop owners stood in their doorways, sharing details with each other. The food court was buzzing with conversations about civil rights and proper police procedure. Something had shifted in the community's consciousness. The teenage girl sat with a counselor in a quiet corner of the security office, giving her statement. Her voice remained steady as she recounted the events, her composure continuing to impress everyone present. "I just did what my father taught me," she explained, a small tremor finally showing in her hands as the adrenaline wore off. Her father, the FBI agent, stood nearby, maintaining his professional demeanor while various officials reviewed the security footage. His phone buzzed constantly. News of the incident had reached higher levels of law enforcement. This was becoming more than a local incident, it was turning into a watershed moment for the department. In another room, the officer who made the wrongful arrest sat silently, his badge and firearm already surrendered. The weight of his actions pressed down on him as he watched his career unravel. Years of unchecked biases and ignored warnings had finally caught up, captured in high definition for all to see. The mall's head of security worked quickly, copying footage to secure drives. "This will be used for training," he explained to the FBI agent. "Every security officer, every police officer in the region needs to see how quickly poor judgment can escalate a situation." He paused the footage at key moments, noting specific violations of procedure and civil rights. Witness statements poured in from concerned citizens. The law student who had documented everything on his phone submitted a detailed timeline. The off-duty nurse provided her observations about the escalating tension she had noticed. Each statement added another piece to the puzzle, creating an undeniable picture of what had transpired. The shift supervisor made call after call, setting emergency protocols in motion. The officer would be placed on immediate administrative leave. An investigation would begin first thing Monday morning. Training procedures would need to be reviewed and updated. The ripple effects of this one incident would be felt throughout the department for months to come. Late afternoon sun slanted through the security office windows as the initial phase of the investigation wound down. The teenage girl gathered her shopping bags, ready to head home. Her father placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, the first personal gesture he'd allowed himself since arriving at the mall. This wasn't just about one wrongful detention anymore. It was about making sure it never happened to anyone else's child. 3 months after the mall incident, the police department's main conference room was packed with officers attending a mandatory training session. The lights dimmed and familiar footage began playing on the large screen, security camera videos from that fateful Saturday afternoon. The room fell silent as they watched events unfold from multiple angles. The FBI agent stood at the podium, not as an angry father now, but as an instructor. His daughter's experience had become a powerful teaching tool, a real-world example of how quickly poor judgment could escalate and how proper training could prevent similar incidents. The officers in the room leaned forward, taking notes, seeing their own potential mistakes reflected in the footage. "What you're watching isn't just about one officer's actions," he explained, his voice carrying across the silent room. "It's about the choices we make every day in uniform." He paused the video at key moments. highlighting decision points where different choices could have led to different outcomes. The officers nodded, understanding dawning on their faces. In the back of the room, the teenage girl sat quietly, watching her own experience become a lesson for others. She had chosen to be part of these training sessions, turning a traumatic moment into an opportunity for change. Her presence made the training real. She wasn't just a figure on screen, but a living reminder of the impact their actions could have. The investigation into the officer's past record had revealed a pattern that couldn't be ignored. 27 similar complaints had surfaced, each showing the same biases, the same rush to judgment. The department had used these findings to create new oversight procedures, ensuring that warning signs wouldn't be overlooked again. Community meetings began featuring open discussions about police interactions. Local teenagers shared their experiences, parents voiced their concerns, and officers listened. Real dialogue was happening, breaking down barriers that had existed for years. The incident had cracked open a door that couldn't be closed again. The teenage girl's school invited her to speak at assemblies about knowing your rights and staying calm under pressure. She stood at podiums across the district, her voice steady as she shared her story. Other students listened intently, many of them realizing for the first time that they needed to know their rights before they needed to use them. Local law enforcement training programs were completely revamped. The security footage became required viewing for new recruits, showing them exactly what not to do. But more importantly, it showed them how to handle situations properly, how to check their biases, and how to serve their community with respect and professionalism. The FBI agent worked closely with police leadership, helping develop better community relations programs. His daughter's experience had highlighted the need for bridge building between law enforcement and the communities they served. Officers began attending community events not as authority figures, but as neighbors wanting to understand and connect. Social media played its part too. The viral videos of the incident had sparked important conversations online, but instead of just anger, they led to constructive discussions about reform and accountability. The comment sections filled with stories from others who had faced similar situations, creating a powerful testimony for change. Small changes appeared in everyday interactions. Officers took extra moments to explain their actions to citizens. Community members felt more confident about respectfully asserting their rights. The incident had shown everyone that positive change was possible when accountability met opportunity for improvement. What had started as one wrongful detention had grown into a movement for better understanding between law enforcement and the community they served.